One of the things that bothers me in the Wing Chun world is the translation of Biu-ji. Biu-ji often gets translated as darting fingers or thrusting fingers, and that's not entirely appropriate. Now you can say, oh yeah, but we have the finger jabs, right? But Biu-ji is not overly filled with them. There are several in there, but it's not the entire point of the form. And, obviously a lot of the focus of the form is on the two-way energy, the last second, let's use the Tai Chi term, Fajin principle. We're trying to push that into it, right? It's a more advanced form per se. But one of the problems with that translation of darting fingers or thrusting fingers is that Biu is not a verb, Biu is a noun. This is Biu. Biu translates to dart, the object or tip of a spear. Well, see, the problem is here, right? A dart is thrown, typically. There are rope darts, which I guess would be swung instead of thrown. And then spears tend to be thrusted. Some spears are thrown, but if we're talking, especially Southern Chinese martial arts, and the militia movement, especially we're talking Foshan, where Wing Chun is from, major militia movement, you're talking about, grunts marching in formation with spears. They're not throwing their spears, they're doing spear formation work. So very standard parry and thrust kind of things. Well, a spear might have a darting motion to it, rapid fire, sewing machine attacks. But darts, because they're thrown, can't really be darting, which is funny that we use that word, because darting really means kind of a rapid motion. You think of a snake flicking its tongue or something like that, right? Or somebody's eyes darting around the room. It's just a very quick, rapid motion. And it's not that that is an entirely inappropriate word for what we're doing, but it's not quite descriptive enough for what is going on here. The next problem with it is that the word ji does mean finger. Yes, it absolutely means finger, but it also means to point. And if it means to point, then there's a broader context here that we need to look into. And the reason that you might think about this is if we kind of look at the progression of the forms, just the three empty hand forms, we'll skip the other forms for the moment, right? If you look at Silam Tao, right, it's the first small study. And don't call it the little idea form, that's a terrible translation, right? It's the first small study. And if you look at that, right, it's basics, it's foundation work, right? It's structure, it's center line, it's an introduction to techniques, it's an introduction to parry and counter, right? Just basics, 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 basics. It is education, it's learning your ABCs. Then from there we can look at Chum Kiu. And Chum Kiu is teaching us how to move with the techniques and different kinds of stepping, different attitudes of stepping, things like that. But if we look at the translation of Chum Kiu, many people translate it as seeking bridge. It's not the only translation, but it's probably the most popular one. And the concept of seeking a bridge, well, if we put that in fencing terms, that is like entering into the bind, right? What we're saying in Wing Chun is that we want to get in where we can control the line. We're creating the bridge so that we can control the line, so that we have the line of an attack and our opponent does not. That's an important concept here. And then that brings us to Biu-ji. Maybe, just maybe, Biu-ji has nothing to do with your fingers. Maybe Biu-ji has nothing to do with darting or thrusting. Maybe Biu-ji has everything to do with putting the tip of your weapon, your spear tip. We use the long pole. It's no secret that that is a surrogate for a spear. Maybe it's about putting your spear tip, pointing with the tip of your spear. That is putting yourself back on line. Well, one of the things that we need to look at when we train Biu-ji, there's one of the old maxims that says Biu-ji contains life-saving emergency techniques. Well, what does that mean, right? Isn't every technique a life-saving emergency technique? Well, let's go into what does emergency technique mean. Emergency technique really just means that you weren't winning and you have to do something to get back ahead so that you're not just even, but winning. That's all that means. Life-saving meaning you were in a really, really bad spot. Well, again, if we look at fencing, a lot of this ends up happening with when I enter into range where I can actually attack my opponent, sometimes things don't go according to plan. Sometimes the line is wrong and I need to correct my line. And I believe very personally, I believe that BUG is more about capturing the line than it is about darting fingers. And when we look at it in the sense of fencing, when we look at it in the sense from being informed by the weapons, then we can really take hold of this concept, and especially the concept of emergency techniques. And what are we talking about, right? You learned your basics, you learned how to attack, you learned how to defend, you learned how to move, you learned how to even start controlling the fight, but it's all offense, right? It's defense, it's offense, but it's not necessarily the savvy, subtle stuff. You enter into the bind, great, right? But what happens when your opponent is a match for you or better than you? That means that the line is going to be constantly changing, and you're going to have to play catch up from time to time. Now, what does capturing the line mean? Capturing the line could mean that you lost the line. Could mean that your opponent did something better than you and you lost the line. It could also mean that you needed to use a technique that made you give up the line and you have to get back to it. That's fine. Even in fencing, we see a lot of guards that end up being baits, feints, whatnot, that kind of make us give up the line in order to make our opponents do something, and then we return with it. So you may have given up the line for a certain tactic. And then it could just be early on in the fight and you never had the line to begin with, or you moved out of range or something like that, and you have to move back into range, you have to move back into engagement. And when you move back into engagement, you have to be able to do so on the line of attack, with their line of attack being off of you. So when we look at BUG, I really want you to start thinking in terms of fencing here. Don't think about finger jabs. Don't think about darting fingers. Don't think about thrusting fingers. Don't think about thrusting, darting, anything, right? If you were going to use a verb there, what do darts and spears have in common? Because they operate completely different. Well, piercing, right? So if you were going to put a verb in there, piercing fingers would be a lot more accurate, but that's still not enough. I think what we're talking about here is getting my tip online. You lead with the tip of the weapon. You lead with the tip of the spear. You lead with the tip of the knife. You always lead with the dangerous point of the weapon, unless you are doing specific tactics that require you to abandon that line in order to coax out something else. And that being the case, what we're really talking about here is tactical and principle. We are not talking about a finger jab technique. That's not the important bit here. When I was learning BUG, my Sifu always tried to instill this concept of you're trying to put all of your energy at the last point of the weapon, whether it was an elbow, a chop, a finger jab, a palm, whatever. You're always trying to surge that energy all the way to the end of the weapon, in some cases like a whip. And also the form focuses very heavily on two-way energy, which most of the time, as we know, right, especially in close range combat, is I'm grabbing you to hold you and hit you, to pull you and hit you, those kind of things. And it could just be the general fan sao principle of constantly cycling the hands so that the previous hand is useful again, ready for action again. So those are all things that we have built in there, right? So the meaning of the word, that maxim of life-saving emergency techniques, these principles of kind of last-second energy, fajin to use the Tai Chi term, and two-way energy. What are we really talking about? We're talking about tactics and principles. We are not talking about jabbing somebody in the eye with a finger. Start studying beyond the surface. You have to go beyond the surface. All right, I think I've rambled on long enough. So remember, it's about capturing the line. It's not about jabbing with your fingers. I will talk to you guys later. Good journey.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, give the dog a bone. You can follow us on our other social media accounts, and if you really like us, you can head over to Amazon and buy a shirt. You can also go over to Gumroad and purchase some of our instructional courses. All of the links will be provided and also on our website. If you happen to be in the Phoenix area, we would love to meet you. Come drop in for a class, even just to chat. And if you're looking for a new home, we would be happy to have you. So until next time, good journey.